welcome back to the Reflection Podcast. To begin our time today, hear the Apostle Peter's encouragement to those entrusted with the care of God's people. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd comes, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. These words from 1 Peter remind us of the calling, the humility, and the hope that shape faithful ministry. With that spirit before us, we welcome the Reverend Dr. Jerry Kieschnick to the Reflection Podcast, and I'm going to be entering into a conversation about leadership, service, and the work of Christ in the church. Sit back and enjoy today's conversation with Jerry Kieschnick on this episode of the Reflection Podcast. In the pastor's office with me today is Dr. Jerry Kieschnick. Jerry, thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
So, as I was thinking about this conversation, I've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time. I follow you on social media, and you send out a weekly email, I believe it is. But we actually met a few years ago, and it was a sort of a happen chance meeting, and at a baseball game, which, if anybody that knows me knows, that's not a surprise because I go to a lot of baseball games. But I do want to bring other people that are maybe new to this, and especially younger people. I was talking with my colleague, and when you were first elected as synodical president was the year before she was born. So that made me feel really old at that point. But so let's give a little background to you and how you got up to this point where you are in your life. I know it's a long story, but I think it's going to be a really interesting story. Let's go and give a little bit of biography of Jerry Kieschnick.
All right, I'll be happy to. And if I get too long-winded, just do something like this so I know I should wind it up. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. Good and godly parents, lay people. My daddy was a meat cutter, ended up being in charge of meat departments of a chain of grocery stores. Mother was a homemaker and mother of four. I have an older sister, two younger sisters, the only boy. They claim I'm spoiled. I claim they're spoiled. We grew up in Houston. I went to Lutheran school, kindergarten and elementary through 8th grade, public high school, Bel Air High School, public university, Texas A&M. I was in the Corps of Cadets, loved it. Did a lot of good things in the Corps, including member of the Ross Volunteers, which is a precision marching group wearing white uniforms and red sashes and leading inaugural parades and Mardi Gras parades and all those kinds of things. I was a company commander. I enrolled in the School of Veterinary Medicine. I'd done pre-vet for the first 2 years, got right in, had good grades, rocking and rolling. At the end of my first year of vet school, which was the end of my junior year at A&M, I failed embryology. All of a sudden, the career path came to a screeching halt. So instead of taking that course again and reapplying for vet school and wasting a year of my life, I just introspectively was seeking the Lord's will and direction. So I did the thing that came most natural, which was just grab that degree at the end of the fourth year. So I have a degree in animal science, and it just happened that a pastor in Austin knew that I was around and was trying to figure out what to do. So he called me. I didn't know him. He called me on August 15 and said, "I understand you want to do some church work." I had shared that possibility with my campus pastor. And I said, "Sir, I don't know if I do or not. I'd like to try church work." He said, "Drive to Austin tomorrow." So I drove from Houston to Austin, had a 1-hour interview with Albert F. Jesse, who I didn't know from Adam, but later on found out he was big-time pastor of a big-time church, and he had been district president of Texas. Didn't know that. All I knew is that I needed a job, and he hired me to teach the fourth grade with a degree in animal science for $200 a month. And on the one hand, I thought I must have really impressed the man. And on the other hand, I realized, hello, this was August 15. School started September 1. He had a fourth grade classroom with no teacher. I had a pulse, and I was willing to work for $200 a month. So I was the man. I moved to Austin, taught the fourth grade to the best of my ability, really just loved the kids. That's what I did mostly and kind of muddled through the academics. There was a kid in my class who had an older sister, and that turned out to be my dear wife. That's how we met. And if I hadn't failed a course in embryology, I never would have moved to Austin, never would have taught school, never would have met Terry. We will have been married next week, 60 years.
Congratulations.
A few months ago, she was reading the newspaper and she said, "Honey, look at here. These people have been married 60 years." I said, "Sweetie, I hate to break it to you, but in about 4 months, that's going to be us." And she said, "Oh." So that's the story of the beginning of my life. And I really had no intention to be a pastor. Teaching the fourth grade really got me engaged in serving the Lord in a congregational setting. So the day I asked Terry to marry me, August 15, 1965, I said, it's a twofold question. Would you marry me and would you go with me to the seminary? I knew the answer to the question before I asked. Otherwise, she might have just said yes to one and no to the other, but I wasn't going to take that chance. So we got married at midterm. I went to grad school for a semester, a long story. At the end of that semester of grad school, we got married in Austin at St. Paul Lutheran Church, January 29, my 23rd birthday. And that night it was 12 degrees in Central Texas. We had some winter down here too. We moved to Houston. I taught school for one semester for a teacher, a young lady on maternity leave at Pilgrim Lutheran School in Houston. And then we moved in June of 1966, 4 months, 5 months after we got married, to Springfield, Illinois, to what then was Concordia Theological Seminary in Springfield. Now it's in Fort Wayne. We were there for 2 years. Went on vicarage the third year to Ascension Lutheran Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. Incredible experience. Pastor Leslie Frerking, I had no idea anything about the man or the church, but he had been a district president of the Southeastern District and was a wonderful mentor, stern guy, hardworking guy, mostly workaholic kind of a guy, but brilliant. He knew the scriptures right and left. He knew people. He knew leadership. I learned a lot that year. We moved back to Springfield for the final year of the seminary. Terry was working full-time at an insurance agency, and I had several part-time jobs over our time in Springfield. Graduated in May, I guess, of 1970. First call was to Biloxi, Mississippi. Oh, by the way, our daughter was born in Springfield in April, right before we left to go to our first call in Biloxi, Mississippi, Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd. Great experience, three years there. I was ordained first on June 7th, 1970 at my home congregation, St. Mathew Lutheran in Houston. And then we moved to Biloxi, spent 3 years there, got a call to Beaumont, Texas, Redeemer Lutheran Church, that I just didn't want to leave Biloxi, but I felt the tug of the Spirit, so we moved to Beaumont. Served there for 8 years. During part of that time, we adopted our son, who was 2 years old at the time. So our family of four then moved again in 1981 to Georgetown, Texas, where we live now, a northerly suburb of Austin, to start a new mission from scratch. There wasn't anything here. 5 acres of land the district had purchased, but 1981, interest rates were 18%. I took a significant cut in pay to move to the mission board salary scale. It was a tough time financially. Terry, as she says, put on her pantyhose and went back to work to help support the family. She was in the wholesale fine jewelry business for 17 years. And served to got that church established. We built a first unit, a really nice facility. At the end of 5 years, I got another call to leave that and to move to development with Lutheran Foundation of Texas. And the guy that got me into that was another mentor of mine, Dr. Carl Heckman, who had been president of Texas District for a number of years. When he retired from that, he took over the Church Extension Fund in Texas and also the foundation. So he saw me one day in the district office and said, "You need to apply for this job." I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Director of Development for Lutheran Foundation of Texas." I said, "What's that?" I had no idea what that was. So in a very, very challenging set of circumstances to leave parish ministry and go to basically development work, fundraising, plan giving primarily. It's one of those things where the Lord just said, "You got to do this." And every time I have moved, it's been the Lord has said, "You got to do this." And I have said, "I'm not sure I really want to do that." And he said, "I don't care. You've got to do this." So I did that for 5 years. Served under Dr. Heckman until he got bladder cancer. And before he got cancer, he said, "You and I need to trade positions. You need to take over the chief executive officer position. I need to be your servant." I said, "Sir, I can't, I don't know if I can do it." He said, "Yeah, you can." So I did that, and he got this bladder cancer and went to have surgery and never got out of the hospital. He passed away in the hospital. So that was a very challenging time. After 5 years running around the district and preaching in congregations and talking to people, I got elected district president of Texas District. In my wildest dreams, I had no desire, no ambition, no idea that that would ever happen. But it happened. It happened 4 times. And in the middle of my fourth and final term limits were there for 4 3-year terms. And at the end of 10 years, I got elected president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. I still find that kind of hard to believe, frankly, because it was the farthest thing from my mind. Never intended, never desired, never ran, never politicked, and didn't do any of that stuff, unlike some others. But I got elected 3 times. So Terry and I moved to St. Louis. That was in 2001. That was our first term. Got elected 2 more times until the convention of 2010. In 2010, I was unelected. So we packed our bags and belongings and moved back to Georgetown, Texas, where our kids, grown adult kids now, still lived. And we had 2 grandkids. They were living in Georgetown at the time. So we moved back here in a strange, ironic, divinely inspired turn of events. Tom Seidel, who was president of Concordia University in Austin, on the day of the election in 2001, gave me a card in an envelope the morning of the election at the convention floor. He said, "Put this in your pocket, read it tonight." I said, "Okay." So I put it in my coat pocket, didn't think anything more about it. I took care of business, and part of that business was being unelected and having to chair the rest of the convention with that reality and all the unknowns facing me. So at the end of that day, Terry and I attended 3 banquets to which we had been previously invited, and they were very emotionally charged, and people were in tears, and we were in tears. And finally, at the end of the evening, it was about 11 o'clock, we finally got back to the hotel, escorted by our bodyguard. And we went into the hotel room. I took off my suit coat and felt something in the pocket. And I thought, "What's that?" So I reached in. That was that card that Tom Seidel had given me earlier that morning. So I opened it, and it was a card that said this. I had known Tom for several years. I helped elect him at Concordia, wonderful guy. It said this: "Jerry, we're praying that you get reelected. In case you don't, we have a place for you at Concordia, Texas. Tom." So I put that aside, had no idea what that was about, and didn't know if I was interested or not. Went through the rest of the convention, finished it, moved back to Texas. In the meantime, I've been talking to Tom, and he said, "We want you to come beat the drum for us." So I did that for 5 years at Concordia, Texas. Great experience. He's a great man, wonderful, wonderful leader, great university, notwithstanding some of the public relations stuff that's out there now, and the incredible, incredible lawsuit that the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod filed against one of its universities. Really? The scripture says something about that, gentlemen and ladies. Anyway, I did that for 5 years, and then a friend of mine who I grew up with in Houston at St. Mathew was in charge of the Lutheran Foundation of Texas, and he saw me one day and said, you know, I think it'd be a good thing for you to come take my place so I can retire. He's 7 years younger than I am, but he likes to play golf more than I do, and he had a business that he sold, so he was ready to retire. So I did that first as kind of director of development and or maybe presidential ambassador or something, and then I was named chief executive officer. I did served in that role for 9 years, retired from that position on September 7th of last year, 2025. And I was thinking about what to do and just kind of figuring out what life was going to be like as a retiree. When a week before that, my dear wife fell in the backyard and fractured her pelvis in 3 places. So I spent the last week of my work basically with time out, taking care of my dear wife, and then the retirement party, a great, great celebration, wonderful thing. And 23 days later, I went to work for Pastoral Leadership Institute. Pastor Ben Haupt, a wonderful man who I had met a few times prior to that, called me actually right about the time of my retirement, maybe a few days earlier, and said, what are you going to do when you retire? And I said, I don't know. He said, why don't you come to Pastoral Leadership Institute? Well, I had had a hand in the origination of Pastoral Leadership Institute, PLI, back in the mid-90s when I was district president. There were 8 pastors, 3 of whom were pastors in Texas, who I knew very well. I knew the rest of them also. Decided they needed to form an organization that would enable training of pastors who could take their places. They were all pastors of large churches, and seminaries don't teach pastors how to serve large congregations. So they just learned it on the fly, and they felt that they could do something. They felt called to do something that would train other pastors to maybe take their place someday. So they needed some help, kind of beating the drum. That's a term I use a lot. So I said, maybe I could do that for you. Well, I introduced them to the Council of Presidents, invited the leader of PLI, Norbert Esch, to come to one of the meetings. He bought lunch for the council, 35 district presidents, and had a chance to tell them what this was all about. So most of the district presidents, all but maybe 2, got on board and nominated pastors in their district to be candidates for training under PLI. And it was a 4-year curriculum. Well, that went on for a number of years. And then when enough pastors had been trained, and basically the ones that they had in mind, the kind of person they had in mind had been trained, the district president said, can you do this training for other pastors? And they said, sure. So that went on for years. I went on to other things and really didn't pay much attention to PLI until I got the call from Ben Haupt. So it's a wonderful ministry that's morphed and changed quite a bit, especially in the last couple of years. It's international now, and PLI trains pastors of not just Lutheran persuasion, but any Christian denomination or any Christian church with no denomination. Last year alone, internationally, PLI trained 17,000 pastors. It's a new model. It's not a PLI staff person having face-to-face contact with 17,000 people. PLI only has 5 full-time workers. So it's training local leaders to train pastors in their circle of acquaintance and in their geographic area. So it's become a very economic and very, very productive, very efficient operation. Otherwise, it'd be impossible for a small organization like we have to actually be face to face with 17,000 pastors. So I am working as presidential ambassador for Pastoral Leadership Institute, and I'm helping develop a capital campaign and helping find people who want to be prayer partners and financial partners in this very exciting ministry. So maybe I've given you more detail than you wanted, Ed, but that brings you up to date on where I started and where I am right now.
I want to circle back on something. You said it a couple times about God calling you, and your answer was, I don't think I want to do that. Isn't that the way God usually works, though, right? He has a obviously he has a longer view of things. And how does how did you get to the point where you were ready to say, whatever, God, you're in charge of this, I'll follow along? Did that come almost naturally, or did you have to work at that one?
Yes and yes, it was both. The bug sort of hit me when I was at St. Paul in Austin teaching that fourth grade class. The pastor there was a great man. He was a great preacher. I went to church every chance I could, both services on Sunday. When Terry and I started dating, we went to church Sunday night. That was our date. We went to church and did something afterwards. But he was an inspiring man, and I don't think he ever said anything to me about the possibility of being a pastor. I just kind of caught the flavor through his leadership, and Dr. Heckman also during my year of teaching. I got to see him a few times. He had a kid in the classroom right across the hall from me, so I'd see him from time to time when he picked up his son. And as Terry and I talked about what the future would hold when we started getting serious, I said, I don't think I want to teach the fourth grade for the rest of my career. I think I'll go to graduate school and maybe get a degree and a master's degree so I can teach in college or high school. So that sort of had me in the realm of church work, and yet the pastoral thing just kind of came up when Terry and I were dating, the seminary thing. So when it came time to move from place to place, that was the hardest part of this whole thing because we invest ourselves in people. Terry and I love people. Terry is, I mean, she's never met a stranger. She's at the grocery store right now. I guarantee you she's walking up and down the aisle talking to people. She just does. And she'll stop and pray for people right there in the grocery aisle. So in the first parish in Biloxi, they were great people. We didn't know what we were doing. I had no idea how to be a pastor except for the experience I had on vicarage. That's an exaggeration. I kind of knew what it was like, but there were decisions and there was leadership, all those things that go into ministry. And the thought of leaving those dear people with whom we fell madly in love during 3 years was really hard. So the hard part about following the Lord's will once I got into ministry was leaving something that I really felt committed to and really was enjoying maybe a stretch because there was a time in the first parish when I said, is this the right thing? Am I in the right place? I mean, this is hard. This is hard. It's hard to see results. We were 1 mile from Keesler Air Force Base, and we had a steady flow of people who would come in on TDY and be with us for 6 weeks, and then they were gone. So we're investing a lot of time and energy in people only to have them go, except for the retirees and the people who were permanent citizens in Biloxi. So the same thing was true everywhere we went. It was just, the people that we worked with and the people who were our constituents or congregational members just earned a special place in our heart, and we in theirs. So to tell them goodbye was hard. And when kids came along, that was really hard to go from a fairly comfortable life at an established parish in Beaumont to nothing. No church building, no pencils, no paper clips, no nothing. With terrible economic times, pulling the kids out of school, that was hard. So those personal, practical decisions have always been at the I don't know at the forefront, but certainly in the mix of factors to consider when having to say yes or no to a call, a definite call that's come from congregations or came from a mission board, it came from a convention. those are calls. The Lord works through those things, and they've all been difficult, but they've all been exciting. They've all had a certain amount of enjoyment. I mean, I like to talk. I like to preach. I love to teach. I like to talk to people. I like to hear what makes them tick. I just all those things. They're all people things. And one of the things I found as a district president, occasionally there'd be pastors who were sort of having difficulties and they'd come in and talk to me, or their people would come and talk to me. And the first question I would ask was this: Pastor, do you like people? Do you like people? And a couple of times the pastor would say, no, I really don't like people. I say, well, what brought you to the pastoral ministry? If you don't like people, how can you be? No wonder your people are not happy. No wonder you're not happy. I helped one guy become an artist. He said, I said, what do you want to do? He said, I want to be an artist. I said, you may go be an artist. He said, really? I said, yeah, you have my permission. Go ahead. He did. And he stayed in the ministry part-time in a small parish. So that's a long answer, short question. The change that comes about, the newness, the challenge, they're always different. And I always, when it came time to consider a call, I always said, and I had calls that I declined. And those calls, I always asked, is this something that's going to challenge me and it's going to impact the kingdom in a way that I'm not doing it now? And none of them was a sort of what the world would call a lateral move, doing the same thing with different people in different places. I had no interest in doing that. They all had a unique challenge which stretched me.
You mentioned that too, that maybe it was just you might not even realize you mentioned it was about not seeking the call. And I've heard that a lot. And I think that a lot of the more successful or maybe the more blessed amongst those who serve God's call are the ones that did not seek out the office. And I do want to go back because it was 25 years ago when you were first elected as president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And I realize there are people listening that don't even know what that is. They don't have any experience with the Missouri Synod, but every 3 years or so, we meet together and we in convention and want to choose a leader for the entire body of congregations, which is sitting at around 5,800 congregations right now. But you came to the presidency in a rather unique situation. It was the first time in our history, and we have been a synod, a church body since 1847, that we did not have a sitting president. Dr. Barry, who was your predecessor, was the first time in our history, I believe, that the president had entered into the church triumphant while in office. So it was a really unique situation. But one of the things that, and I think people need to realize that because sometimes history begins the day we remember things, and there's a lot of young people out there that don't know our history, and I think it's important for us to understand that. You never really searched for those calls. You were not looking for that next step. You were just wanted to serve. And I got that impression. I was a delegate to that convention. So I could feel it, I could hear it, and I could see it amongst that you were the right person for the call because you weren't seeking it. And that's usually the way it is with a lot of people, especially in the church. I want to talk about, well, let me give you a chance to respond to all that I
Okay,
just.
yeah, I'll say it bluntly. I have very little respect for anybody in the church who politics, seeks, asks for, uses legitimate or illegitimate processes to get elected. I firmly believe scripturally the office seeks the man. The man does not seek the office. And if the Lord wants a person in the office, even though that person may not have any desire to be in that office, the Lord is going to get him there. The Bible's full of stories like that.
I agree. I completely agree. And it's better to follow the leading of God as he calls us instead of having to get to a position where God has to redeem us from where we have been going instead. And I think I hear that as well. I do want to talk, while I got you, and I kick myself if I didn't ask about this. During your tenure as president of this church body, there was one program, one initiative, ablaze. I want to kind of drill down on that one a little bit. Could you give us a little background of what that was all about?
Yeah, I was installed on September 7, 2001. Some people that are listening probably know what happened on September excuse me, September 8, not September 7, September 8, 2001. 3 days later, 9/11 took place. So I had been pretty well occupied with that and with the experience that one of our district presidents had of participating in what was called a service of prayer for America in Yankee Stadium. It caused some consternation on the part of some pastors. By the way, 95% of the communication we got from people was praise the Lord. What a wonderful testimony and witness that was. So into that mix, I had prostate cancer. We had just moved to St. Louis and I had prostate cancer. So my doctor said, you need to have, I recommend you have a radical prostatectomy. So on November 26th of 2001, I had prostate surgery, radical prostatectomy. So there were some changes in my life going on, and I'm trying to provide leadership to the staff of the International Center and to the whole church body, to the 35 district presidents and 5 vice presidents. There were only 5 in those days. When John Brownersreuter, who actually right now is the president of the Texas district, he was elected just last summer. He was senior assistant. I'd known John for many years, brought him with me from Texas. John was working with the Board of Missions, and they came up with the idea that we need to do something that would challenge and inspire and motivate people in our church to do something other than come to church on Sunday and go home and come back to church again the next Sunday. And what emerged through a series of conversations and communications was a blaze. And a blaze simply said, we believe that it would be a godly thing, that God is calling us to give witness to our faith. And here's where some people were kind of guffawing or saying pshaw on. But we picked a target. We said, how about if we do that for 100 million people in the next several years? 100 million people. And there were at that time, there were probably 6 billion people in the world. So that's the background of Ablaze. And then somebody came along and said, you know, we could probably help districts start some new churches, because if we're giving witness to our faith, it's going to be some inspiration to start new churches. So we put together a corollary initiative called Fan into Flame. And that was, and the objective was to raise $100 million during the time that Ablaze was in place. So all those things were approved by the Synod and Convention. And I think we probably got to $80 million. I don't think we quite reached 100 million before I got unelected. And as soon as I was unelected, it's, as we say, crickets.
Yeah.
Nothing else was done or said to follow through on a synodically approved campaign and initiative. It just kind of died for lack of leadership. So that's how Blaze came to be. And it did a lot of good for those churches, those pastors, those district presidents, those districts who raised significant dollars. They started a bunch of new churches. So it was a good and godly thing.
It was inspirational for me. I was in a church in Wisconsin at the time, and then I took it to California. I took a call to Los Angeles area, and we continued on with that initiative, because I know that a lot of people had a problem with the numbers thing, and I don't quite, I get it, but I don't quite understand it, because you don't want to put the numbers on it. It's never about the numbers. I said, but to not have the numbers is also unbiblical. I mean, the book of Acts twice talks about the number of people who came to faith because of the work that the Holy Spirit was doing through the church. And I don't think we can dismiss it out of hand, but it doesn't become the end all be all. But of course, but yeah, I get that, and I don't want to run down anybody else, but I thought it was an incredible initiative, and it put some inspiration into the people we can share this faith that we have. It's something that's so very, very important. And I think today, even as we speak, we're recording this in early 2026. We need this more than ever, is to get people in the Word but also to share the Word, the good news of Christ. It's so incredibly important. You talked
Our
about
world,
PLI. Yeah, go
our
ahead.
world, our world is in a mess.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly, isn't it?
Yep.
And I think the church is uniquely situated, as it always has been, to be an answer to it. I mean, we're not going to save the world per se, because the destination of the world is fire, as First Peter says, but we have a mission to reach the people of the world. And now we're at 8 billion people in the world. And they need to hear this good news. You mentioned PLI, and I actually have talked with Ben Hopt about this as well. And it kind of dovetails into the whole alternate route for pastors and training that I think now is starting to come to the forefront of the discussion of our local church body. But I think it's in Christianity in general too. How do we get men to serve in the church? And of course, it's not us; it's the Holy Spirit. But um, I just wanted to touch a little bit of base on that, because you have a unique perspective on that, being a former an emeriti of the presidency of the Missouri Synod. What is the church's function? What is the church's mission in bringing not only the gospel to the world? That's certainly first and foremost, but how do we get people involved in this? And um, maybe give you an opportunity to weigh in a little bit on what can be a controversial issue right now.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. First of all, how do you help people become pastors? Well, I think parents, grandparents, pastors, teachers, fellow church members are key. It doesn't help if parents go home after church and just gripe about the pastor and the pastor's sermon and everything else. The kids hear what their parents say. On the other hand, if parents go home and say, "Oh my goodness, I was blessed by what pastor had to say, and our church is doing such a great job of worship and mission and care for people," that rubs off. And young people, young men who are thinking about what they want to do for a career, they are influenced by what they hear, what they see, what they experience. If a pastor is not happy being a pastor, it's pretty hard to hide that. And people can see that. And if a young person sees a pastor that's not happy, he says, "I don't want to go someplace and do something that I'm not going to be happy doing. I want to enjoy life and my calling." So that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is that calling doesn't always come to a 4-year-old when he's pulling a wagon in the backyard. I've got some buddies at the seminary who said, I've always wanted to be a pastor. And when I was 5 years old, I used to preach to my dog in the backyard. Well, God bless you, brother. That wasn't my experience. I never had that. So what we discovered, what we know, is that a lot of times people will go to school and get out in the workforce and have a career and find it less than fulfilling, less than meaningful, less than productive. There's a longing for something that's different, that's better, that's more. And that's where people during my time in the seminary and for a long time have come into the pastoral ministry as a second career. When I was in the seminary, the only way for that to happen would be for a guy, I use this metaphor, to sell his cow and burn his plow and move up to the Midwest. No matter where he was living at the time, no matter what he was doing, the only way to go there was to go there, to go to St. Louis or Springfield, Illinois in my days, Fort Wayne, Indiana in today. So while I was in office, this same John Brownersrohr that I mentioned a while ago, my district president now, and I were talking about this whole thing. And he pretty much single-handedly, with some help, I'll give him almost all the credit, but I had a hand in it too. We said there's got to be a better way. So we worked with both seminary faculties, both seminary presidents, both seminary boards of regents, the board of directors of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the council of presidents of the LCMS. In those days, we had a board for pastoral education. Anybody that moved and that had a hand in leadership in our church body, we engaged with formulating a practice, a policy, a program, something that would help people who were in a different career and who felt the calling in the pastoral ministry, but simply did not make sense. Family sense, economic sense. It didn't make any sense to have to sell his cow, burn his plow, try to sell his house. In those days, homes weren't selling. It was tough. So we wanted to make it possible for people who felt a calling to the ministry and, importantly, who were recognized by their peers in their parish as fit for ministry. So that's how SMP, Specific Ministry Pastor, developed. And the idea was congregations had to raise their hand and say, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, we got a guy right here in our parish. We think he'd be a good pastor. We're going to nominate him for SMP. And the whole process, it had a process of evaluation, interviews, acceptance, and a rigorous theological training. The idea was to effect ordination early in the process. Nothing in the Holy Scriptures talks much about ordination at all, frankly, but it certainly doesn't say anything about having to wait for 4 years of seminary before you get ordained. So one of the brilliant parts of SMP was all these guys who applied for SMP were interviewed. There was a very good interview committee, starting with his own district president. And if determined to be qualified for ministry, that person could be ordained, called by the congregation, ordained, with the proviso that he continued to do some studies, some curriculum, go through the seminary curriculum that was prescribed under the aspect of what does this guy know and what does he not know? And let's get him what he does not know so that can work with what he does know to make him a well-qualified pastor. So he was serving under supervision and always a supervising pastor. All those kinds of things happened, and it took off. It took a while really to go, but my understanding is that there have been years recently, maybe even now, where the number of SMP pastors exceeds the number of residential students, guys who are there to go through the whole 4-year training. So, and part of that, frankly, was a response to some of the more, quote, confessional, conservative pastors in our church body that didn't like the licensed lay deacon thing. They thought that person should not be administering the sacrament because he's not ordained. So we said, okay, let's figure out a way to do early ordination under supervision with the proviso that the guy has to be evaluated again. I forget the details now, but a few years down the road, he had to be reviewed again to be sure that he was still fit. And if he wasn't fit, then he could be in danger of losing his ordination. So it was and remains a great alternative in the world in which we live. Times are changed. Times have changed. And it's just not realistic to ask everybody to think that everybody's going to be willing to do the kind of things that you have to do. Second career guys, many of them now have wives who have great careers that are location dependent. And for them to quit their career at the age of 30 or 35 or 40 or 50 and to try to sell their house, people were taking a bath, a financial bath, selling their homes in the days that SMP was started. And to yank their kids, their high school kids out of school and move them to the seminary, all those things are human conditions and considerations. And they're not necessary in order for a person to be a pastor. What did St. Paul do? He didn't get Timothy or Titus or any of those guys to come to where he was. He went to where they were.
Yep.
So,
No, I think it's a
did I
great
get off
point.
topic here with your question
Not
or
at
did
all, because I think that's important for us. I'm going to be having I have been having this conversation, not necessarily on a podcast, but about this whole situation that our church body finds itself in is like, why are we narrowing it when we should be expanding it and letting the Lord be the Lord of the church?
and to
I
say
think,
and to say that a person can't apply for this until he's 40 years old, tell me where you get that.
yeah,
Where's the rationale for that? Truthfully, I want to say this in a loving way. I love our seminaries. Holy mackerel. I spent a lot of time in both of our seminaries when I was national church president. The idea that there's only one way
yeah,
for a person to be a pastor, and it's our way, could be seen by some as self-serving because the seminaries, if you don't have students, you don't have tuition. Now, frankly, both of our seminaries have lots of money in endowments. But if you don't have students, what do? I mean, we spend a lot of money for every student who is on the campus of our seminary. And in a time when we have a huge shortage already and a huger shortage coming in the very near future, to make it more difficult to become a pastor doesn't make any sense. You know, one of the two reasons for the forming of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod is the example of the Apostolic Church in Acts chapter 15. They had a challenge. Do we have to require all these Gentiles to be circumcised? They met, and after much discussion, I'd love to know how long that first convention lasted, how many days. They said, no. Why should we make it more difficult for Gentiles to come into the faith? And that's that example is one of the reasons our church body exists, to ignore that and make it more difficult for people to become pastors is, frankly, it's not biblical. And it's certainly not practical or sensible.
I think it comes
But I have
back
no
to
strong feelings about it whatsoever.
no, I think it comes back to who's the Lord of the church and who knows better. I think we need to follow his leading more than we may be comfortable doing. And it does, you even said it in your own career as a pastor. It was about giving up control. He's like, well, Lord, here we go. I may not like it. I may grumble about it, but again, it's letting go. And once we let go, that's when the real blessing, I think, starts to really shower and become more and more evident in our lives. And it's like God knows exactly what he's doing. So I know that there's lots of challenges in the church, and that's why I wanted to bring that up because it's an honest conversation that I think that we need to have more. And the more we talk about it, the more conversation we have, the more communication can only be blessed by God. And I truly believe that. You talked about mentors. I'm going to pivot a little bit here. You talked about those mentors. I'm really want to know a little bit more about how it went when you switched roles with one of your mentors, where he was sort of he was your mentor and you were the mentee, and then you switched roles. Uh, is that something that had a profound? I would imagine it had a profound effect on you.
Yes. So I wasn't not accustomed to being in leadership positions. Three parishes, well, two parishes plus one new mission, which turned into a parish. So I'd been the only pastor. Really didn't have a large staff. I've never been the pastor of a huge congregation per se. So when Carl Heckman and I started working together, he was doing, like I mentioned a while ago, two ministries, Church Extension and the Lutheran Foundation of Texas. And he was supposed to be retired. I don't remember how old he was. He retired probably a whole lot earlier than I did. He was probably in his 60s. So he could have been shoving 70 at the time that I came aboard. And he had a life, he had a family, and he had worked hard. He'd been a military chaplain, he'd been a district president. And I think he was just ready to wind down a little bit. And then the health thing came in, but we made the change before the health thing actually came into play. So it was the kind of deal that I had a little bit of anxiety about it on the one hand. On the other hand, I had been doing that work with him under his leadership and tutelage for, I don't even remember now how long it took, maybe a year or so. And I knew what he was doing. I knew how to do it. So it wasn't a huge hill to climb. It was a little different because all the years that I had known this man, he had been my district president, and I respect district presidents. So it was a little challenging, but it worked fine.
It sure did.
Especially when the good Lord called him home in the middle of that medical procedure. So I didn't have any choice. It was my baby.
Let's, as we wind this down a little bit, because I love to read, I really like to pick your brains. What are you reading these days, and what would you gift to somebody if you were going to give them a book? What would you want somebody to have?
Oh my goodness. That's one of my shortcomings. I talk to a lot of pastors who are voracious leaders and readers. Uh, my deal is I'm a workaholic and I work long hours. And in the old days, we didn't have computers, but I was doing some more reading, mostly the Bible. And in the seminary, of course, the works that we had to read there. But these days, in the last 30 years, probably with the onset of the computer, I look at a screen all day long. When I was in the parish ministry and in the other ministries, I didn't have the luxury of looking at a screen all day long. I was meeting with people a lot. But by the time I got home, a lot of times I still worked at home after dinner, which was not a good thing. My wife called me on that when we moved back to Texas. She nailed me to the wall in love, but she did. And I had to repent. I got on my knees and I said, honey, you forgive me? She did. So the point is, I'm not the kind of guy who likes to read something all day long at work and then at nighttime read something else. My eyes get tired. So I haven't read, I've read a lot of books, don't get me wrong. It's not something that I have going all the time. What book would I recommend? Well, frankly, a secular book that's been very, very helpful is The 7 Habits of not successful people, but effective people. 7 Habits of Effective People. And I've harked back to that book and to those principles a lot, including one that really sticks in my mind: begin with the end in mind. So before you start something, before you start a program, and this is kind of a challenge for me because I get an idea, I think it's a cool idea, and I'm ready to go. Other people are more introspective and more cautious, and they say, well, let's think about what are the implications, what are the costs, what are the likelihoods of success or of failures. I've learned that caution largely through that book. So before I start something, I want to know where do I want this thing to end? Where do I want it to be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 100 years from now? So that'd be one of the books that I would recommend. There's another one that you say this is obvious, and it'd be the Bible. The Bible's there's a book It was called, I think, the Bible Storybook. And it's basically more nearly a chronological telling of the stories of the Bible, and they're compacted. They're, I don't know if redacted is the right word, but summarized. They're easy to read, but they give the flavor of the scriptures and in the movement of God in the scriptures without having to go through some of the stuff in scriptures, which is harder for people who are new to the faith to get through. Like if people get to Numbers or Leviticus, sometimes they just give up. Our church actually just went through a period of reading the Old Testament, New Testament a couple of years ago, but the Old Testament last year chronologically. And it's a really great experience to do that. It's a little challenging to flip forth and back all the time. It's the chronology of the scriptures, which sometimes doesn't sink into the heads of people, even people who've been Christians for a long time. So those are two of the books that I think I would recommend. There are many others. I mean, I'm a Windish person. I'm a Wind by genealogy. That's an Eastern Germany kind of a tribe. And the Winds of Texas, Wends, the Winds of Texas. How the story of how my ancestors, great 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 grandfather, and no, great 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 grandfather and great great grandfather came over on a boat to Ben Nevis in 1854, landed in Galveston, moved into Central Texas, and from there kind of spread out a little bit. That's where I came from. And the story of how they brought the faith with them. It's just a powerful story, huge story. It's an inspirational story. So I'd probably recommend one of those books, The Winds of Texas.
Excellent. Excellent. So let me wrap it up by just asking you, this is my billboard question I ask everyone that's on the podcast. So if I can give you a billboard, an electronic billboard, and millions of people are going to drive by it every day, but you only have maybe 10 seconds at the most of that message they're going to see. So you got to keep it short, sweet, to the point. What would you want to put on that billboard?
Well, I could think of a lot of things, but the one that comes to mind is the response that Jesus gave to the expert in the law. I think it's in Mathew 22, who asked, Teacher, what's the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus gave this simple answer. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. And the second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And the older I get, the more experience I have in the church and in the world, the more I realize that if Jesus said that was the most important thing, how much more can we expect? And I can get on a high horse pretty quickly about this whole movement toward becoming a confessional church, which is restrictive in could be a good way, but it's not always in a good way. But what gives us the right to say this is what you have to do to be a genuine, bona fide Christian? Jesus said what you need is to love the Lord your God with all that you are and all that you have, and put that love to work with your neighbor. And he tells the story about who that neighbor is, the Good Samaritan. So that's a long, there'd be a long posting on a billboard. And maybe it would just be Matthew 22.
Love God, love your neighbor.
Yeah.
Jerry Kieschnick, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Very enlightening, and I'm sure that a lot of people are going to be inspired by our conversation. The Holy Spirit's going to use it to help people reflect God's love for him and their neighbor. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, Ed. God bless you and your ministry and your family.
Thanks to Dr. Kieschnick for joining me today on the Reflection Podcast. I hope that you loved it and were inspired by it. Please rate the show. Give it those 5 stars, a thumbs up, whatever it is that your platform that you're listening to the podcast on allows you to do. Share it, please. Click on the share link and share it across your socials and email and that gets us out to more and more people who I think that can be inspired by these conversations that I have on this podcast. And I wanted to share with you just one final thought that pastors like Jerry Kieschnick and myself even give to God's people week in and week out. This is the blessing of God from the book of Numbers in the Old Testament. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. May this peace guide your steps, strengthen your calling, and keep you steadfast in Christ. Join me again next time on the Reflection Podcast.